Hello everyone and welcome back to another video, guys. This is part two of the Blue Fox library development. So in the last video, I kind of just went over the general idea of the library, and I also kind of walked through my initial thoughts about how I should go about designing it, and I showed a little bit of, a little montage of me coding some of the library. And off screen, I've done a little bit of organization and thought about kind of the direction I want to take this project. And yeah, I thought I'd make another part and this would be a good time to walk you through some of those discoveries. One of the first things, the GitHub is now public. I'm not sure if I actually said this in the last video or if I even like linked the repo. Here's the repo. Give it a star if you want. The repo is here. I have a little bit of information about the packages. So this is a mono repository, as I showed in the last video. And I thought about a little bit more of how to structure the packages, and I think this is a lot better than the last video. We'll be adding way more information here as time goes on. But the main idea right now is to finish like 70 to 80% of the API. By the time these videos start coming out, the API will be nearly like at least testable, right? At least usable. Not like production ready or anything, but usable. Then the idea is to show this to the Blue Fox team and hopefully they like it and they either, want to take over or they just, want me to continue working on it or they don't mind. And I'll try to get their permission to actually like, publish this and use it. Because it would be cool for like this library to be like on the official site, you know what I mean? Like in the API, like a client library section where it's like how to use, this. So maybe that's something I can contribute to with the team. But yeah, that's kind of the goal, right? I mean, at worst case scenario, no one uses this library and I'll just use it internally at work because the whole idea behind making this was I kind of already half did some of this stuff at work anyways, and I figured why not contribute back to the community and just make this like knowledge public, right? Because everything I'm doing here, like there's nothing internally secret about all of this, it's just me building tools to make life a little bit easier. So yeah, we have the API folder, which I think in the last video it was called types. Basically, what this contains is most of the abstract classes. The main reason that this is not just inside of the main module is because abstract classes can still contain actual business logic, which I actually like. So it's basically like, hey, any class that inherits from this class has this logic which it also inherits. So it's a cool way for me to like design an API that other clients can build from and still share logic throughout the whole system, which I'll show you guys in code in a little bit. But the main reason this is separate is just so that if anyone else, in any chance that this ever like this library blows up a little bit and people actually use it, then it'd be really cool and obviously, I love, having the freedom to do what I want. So I'd want other people to be able to easily implement their own client libraries, right? So that's the whole idea behind this folder. The Blue Fox folder is the, name of the actual like core library, which most people are going to use. And this is the client library for the API. So this Blue Fox package imports the API package and the utility package and the TypeScript config package. And same with Convex. Convex imports the API, utils, and config, right? So these two packages will be on npm. Actually, all three of them. But let's go ahead and get into some code, and I'll show you guys how some of this works. Over here, we have this scripts folder, which this is literally just a Windows script for me to publish to npm. So that's nothing important, but just thought I'd mention that. Yeah, so there's a lot of code, and I'll explain everything from start soon. But I have this result type, which is, if you know, I like Rust, and similar to Rust, we have an OK value, which has some kind of data in it. And we also have a status and a timestamp, right? So this is what's returned. Now, this data is a JSON object and it can be anything. And that's how it's typed. And that is not type safe right now. So I would prefer to use this generic and type everything myself. So hopefully I can get some kind of knowledge on that. The next thing I'm going to add is a debugger because I think it would be cool to simply have the user enable a debug flag and they would easily be able to see everything the client library is doing. Like, hey, I'm fetching to this route and I'm using this subscriber ID just to kind of help the developers out. Having information is really important when developing. It's probably a good idea to start inside the API folder. So this folder basically defines the API as obviously stated. Um, Now, I don't know if I'm gonna keep this namespace. The reason I did this originally was to separate things so it's clear that all of this belongs to version one. I don't think that's actually needed because I can just make another file. So I might just remove this namespace and allow the user to just import them directly because the file is kind of a namespace. So it's kind of redundant, I think. But yeah, basically we have this config, which, has some normal config values, right? But yeah, the context is really cool, because basically any class that extends this Blue Fox module automatically has to inherit and pass a context. And so this basically means that when you build a client for this library, you can simply ensure that every single subclass to your client module has valid context because it's required by the base class. So that's a kind of cool way to not have to pass data around, right? And so yeah, that's kind of cool. Request timeouts and max retries, which are a feature I added down here. So the BlueFox module class is basically what everything extends. And that's mainly because of the context, like I said. But the main cool thing about this class also is that everything else has this request method, right? And this method is basically, like it says, a helper to fetch the BlueFox API. So it does the fetch request for you, and it handles retries. It handles the status code, and it also gives you back a timestamp, which may be useful if you want to debug stuff. Who knows? I just thought it sounded good. It also handles aborting the request. So if, say, for example, you don't want your request to take more than 15 seconds, maybe you want to use this on a Lambda, or maybe you pay based on the amount like of CPU time. And if that's the case, you don't want your request running for like more than, 30 seconds maybe, because that's expensive. So that's an easy way to limit all requests, and this will force the request to fail through signals. And here's just some basic, retry logic, some error handling. The other cool thing about the library is that errors are propagated up to the caller. They are not thrown. And this is a big thing inside of this API module, right? So inside of the slash, API package, nothing throws. And that is something that I want to be very sure never happens. In every case, and every error is handled. And the reason for that is I think it is very annoying, especially in the JavaScript world, to have code where you think would never error out, but it actually will, and you didn't handle that case. How many times do you use a third-party package and actually read all the source code, right? Like, do you actually know how easy it is to break your software? No, you just call the code and expect it to work, and anything could happen, right? Like, you could have bad internet and your fetch request fails, right? Um, so I think that it's good that on any time there's an error, just to give the error back to the caller. This way, the person using the library can say, "Oh, I have an error. Okay, well, maybe they don't want their program to crash, right? Maybe they do. You don't know." So because you don't know, I think it's best just to give them the choice. So that's what happens. So we create a new error whenever an error happens, and we simply return the error inside of the return code. So you can see right here, return is false, and the error equals the last error that was thrown. And the cool thing also about this is that because we're using this OK type and error type, you can see that OK is set to false and true, not Boolean, which means this will always be true and this will always be false. So the caller can guarantee that if the value is okay, then they actually have some data. Works out pretty well in TypeScript, which I'll show you guys a little later. But you can see right here, if the request is good, then we just pass back the data. And you can see that the data type is JSON, and we're just parsing that JSON. And yeah, then I just have some, little fancy error handling right here. Nothing too special. Got some error codes, retry logic. Yeah, pretty basic stuff. Few enums. Like I said, this is the low-level API. So my goal is to make this pretty easy for anyone else just to implement their own client. Now, inside of the main package that the public would be using, it's actually pretty simple. So we have a BlueFox client that extends the module. What we do is we create a subscriber, and this is another module, and we create a new one and we pass it the context. And you only have to define the context once, which you can see is right here. So this BlueFox module is a subscriber, and it has its own sort of functions on it, right? Methods. And this is basically the entire subscriber list API right here. We have add, remove, pause, and activate. And all these functions basically check if the arguments are valid. And the main reason for this, even though like TypeScript won't compile if you don't have these validated, is also if these values are null or empty strings, this will still throw, which that is actually invalid. But yeah, the API, as you can see, is pretty simple. Basically, we expose these functions as public and they're accessible to the user. And as you can see, they call the request and they built this URL, which I basically modeled from the docs. They use the appropriate method and they also stringify the text. So yeah, that is super simple and way less code than doing this all yourself, efficiently and effectively, right? And it's pretty much the same thing, just a little nuances and different parameters and stuff. Um, and basically, to call this code is super simple. Let's do blocks equals new blocks lines, API key, and then we do blocks subscriber. Let's do activate, and then yeah, this is literally it. And this is how you would do that. So I think this is a pretty good API start so far. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. If you have any suggestions or if you would like to contribute to the project, I do recommend if you guys do have some sort of app and you need emails to go check out Blue Fox, give some feedback to the company. They're pretty cool people. And yeah, I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.